And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and today we're taking a look at a game called Titans. Titans is a game which is set sort of in a 18th or 19th century war style, except that each side also has a giant titan that walks around and helps fight with them. And the game kind of is that. This is a war game, straight out, but it is a, what I would like to call, Euro war game, because in this game, you're going to take actions and roll dice, but every move is very calculated. Not necessarily chess, but definitely closer to that. In this game, you're going to have a few battles over the course of the game, but not a tremendous amount of battles, so you need to think and deal with each battle carefully. There's also secret objectives and more. Let's take a look. At the beginning of the game, you're going to be picking a scenario to play. So these are 4-player scenarios. There are 3-player scenarios and 2-player scenarios. There's a lot of different scenarios you can pick. And they'll tell you exactly where to put the units for. So here with blue, yellow, red, and green. And you can see I put them out just like it shows here. Sometimes it will tell you to put these in different spots, especially if you're playing a 2- or 3-player game. And that just means that that region is essentially closed for that game. There's also a center region that's designated. You put a token in it because there are some objectives and things that kind of connect to that objective. Each player is going to take a board here. So you have 2 sides of a board. One side has energy and different things that you can do with that. The other, this is the energy side. And then the other side is the basic side. So we're going to talk a little bit about the basic game here. Down here it just shows you the sides of the different dice that are included with the game. And then it will talk about any special ability that you might have. Your Titan will have a special ability. And if you're playing the energy version, they'll have more than one. So here you have your special ability that you have up here. Here is your Titan special ability. And then this shows how many cards you can have maximum in your hand, which is 5. Down here, you're just keeping, this is a marker where you can keep track of your battle strength. There are 4 types of units in this game. There's infantry, cavalry, artillery, and then of course, each player has a massive Titan. You also have a castle, which helps you on the defense. The game is going to revolve around order cards. And so there's a certain number of order cards that you'll have a pile of based on the number of players. You'll draw a certain amount based on the number of players. This is for a 4-player game. There's 4 cards. These are the 4 available cards. These are 4 upcoming cards. So in turn order, one player will go first. They're going to pick a card. So let's say player 1 picks this card. They do the actions on that card. Then the second player picks one. The third player picks one. Then, when there's only 1 card left, that card is discarded, and these come down. So the 4th player now has 4 cards to pick from. So then the 4th player, 1st player, 2nd player, then the 3rd player will have 4 cards to pick from, etc. When you take these cards, you're going to do the actions on the cards in order. The actions are pretty easy. When you have a card that shows a certain unit moving, you can move it to an adjacent territory. So this says, I can move. And by the way, you can do these in any order, not from top to bottom. But I can move an infantry, I can move a Titan, and then I can add a unit of my choice to the board. So I might move this infantry here, I might move this Titan up there, and then, you know what, I would like another cavalry. So I'll add a cavalry to a spot where I already have some troops on the board. So many of the cards are like that. This will let me draw a card from my deck, my personal deck. Now this is a big deal in this game. Each player has a bunch of cards that are theirs for their faction. At the beginning of the game, you're going to draw some of these and you can put these cards into play. They cost a certain number of tactics cards. You're going to have a bunch of tactics cards that you can use, and I'll talk about those later. But when you put these in play, they all do something special. But usually what they involve is these cards will work for you when you have a cavalry unit in battle against an enemy artillery unit. I just need to have an artillery in the battle. I need to have fewer troops in battle than my opponent. I need to have a cavalry and my opponent needs to have an infantry, then I get an extra die. So all these cards have different things, and they have different costs of tactic cards that you need to discard. So when I play an order card that lets me put another one of those in play, I can. and this one also lets me move any unit of my choice to an adjacent area. So many of these cards are simply going to be that, moving stuff to adjacent areas or adding troops. Here I got a cavalry. Sometimes they'll let you pick a whole group as long as it's less than or equal to 4 and move it to an adjacent area. And sometimes there's one card that gives you a fortification, and there are 3 of these in the game, 1 per round, that you'll be able to add to a spot on the board to help you on the defense. Now when you move into a territory that has an enemy unit, that have enemy units in it, there's going to be a battle. This game comes with a pile of dice. These dice match the different units that you'll have in the battle. But the number of things on the die is basically the strength of it. So you can see infantry dice are 1s or 0s. The artillery dice are 1s, 2s, and 3s. Cavalries are 1s and 2s. And the Titan can go anywhere from 2 all the way up to 4. So for each unit you have in battle, you're going to get a dice. But then players can take turns playing the support cards. I called them tactic cards earlier because there's a T on them. But you play these support cards back and forth. In the base game, there are 3 specific kinds of support cards. You will start the game with 3 of these cards, and you might get more. You also might have a special Titan ability that you can play, an army ability that you can play, or one of your special cards that you put into play. But usually you'll play these cards. Now each of the cards has a requirement on it. If it's black, that means you need to have that unit on your side. So I can play this if I have an artillery in the battle. If it's red, your opponent. I can play this if my opponent has a red infantry in the battle. And here my opponent has red cavalry. And cards that are the same type of cards, like this one here, will have different requirements. This means I need an enemy infantry. This means I need my own Titan in the battle. Now what these do is they're going to provide various things. So for example, these middle ones here, if I play one of them, it adds +1 to my total strength. If I play 2, it adds +3. If I play 3 of these cards, it adds +5. This one here says I get to bring a troop from an adjacent area, and they can move in and join the battle. And this one here, if I play 1 of these cards, it gives me an extra infantry die. And if I play 2 of them, it gives me an extra Titan die. Now I want to be very clear here that you are limited by the dice that you have. You'll never roll more than 3 infantry, 2 cavalry, 1 artillery, or 2 Titan dice. You're going to roll 1 for each unit in the battle, but these cards can give you extra ones. Once this has all been determined, players are going to roll their dice. There's possibilities for re-rolls and things like that based on special abilities and such. And then you're going to compare your strength, anything you got from playing cards, plus all the different number of items showing up on your dice, to your opponents. And then you see who won. Now, when you win, your victory is you need to be higher than your opponent, but it's the differential between those 2 numbers that's going to matter what happens. If it's very close, nothing happens, you just force your opponents to retreat. You're going to get a victory point, but your opponent, the loser, gets to draw a new support card. If your differential is by 5 or more, though, notice, you will kill 2 of those units. They still have to retreat. They get to draw 3 cards, but you get 4 points. If you take out your opponent's Titan, if you manage to kill them, and they're not really dead, they go back to your opponent. Well, I guess they're dead, but they go back to your opponent. They lay down. On the next turn, they come face up. And the next turn, they can come back in. But still, if you take out your opponent's Titan, that's worth an extra point. And if you take out a spot where your opponent has a fort, you get an extra point. The benefit of having a fort is usually the defender has to announce all their cards first, but with the fort, the attacker has to announce what cards are going to play first before the defender. Now, walking around the board and fighting people is one way to get points. I've already shown that, especially if you take out your opponent's Titans. But you're also trying to control regions. When you leave a region and there's no one in it, you'll leave a marker there to show that it's yours. And controlling regions at the end of each turn, at the end of each round, can give you points. But players are also going to get points from these secret objective cards. You'll draft these at the beginning of the game, and they're worth a various number of points. Like this one says, control the central region and the regions neighboring that region. And you get and it depends how many regions you need to control is based on a number of players. So in this 4-player game, I would need to control the central region plus 2 more. And if I do so, I get 3 points. Here, attack a smaller army, then attack with a smaller army than opponents, and win the battle. 3 points. Win a battle in which your opponent used at least 2 nation cards, 4 points. Control 2 regions only with your cavalry units, 3 points. Control 4 regions only with your infantry units. Attack a smaller army than the opponents with the smaller opponents and win that battle. So you can see some are very similar to others. They're about controlling or winning in a battle, and these are other ways to get points. And that's the basic game. At the end of every round, you get 1 point for every territory you control, and at the end of the game, after 3 rounds, whoever has the most points is the winner. There is an advanced mode, like I mentioned earlier, when you have these units where you're going to be playing cards. You'll use a different set of cards like this, which are going to provide you with energy and spending energy. They're very similar, and what also gives your Titan, if you spend energy, it gives your Titan a few extra special abilities. There's also some other modes that you can play with the game, and there are many different expansions for it, but hopefully this gives you an idea on how the base game plays. So the miniatures for this game, as you can look at them, they're fine. The ones that are really cool are the Titans themselves. I mean, these are just huge, really cool Titans. I also like the artwork for this game. The different cards that you have show various pictures. There's a lot of the same artwork used on the different nations, but I like how it looks. The card quality is also really good. The rule book is fine. I think the symbology for what you can do on your turn, I think these cards work really well. There is a rule book thing where I think the rule book is fine. It explains the rules. It's a nice, big, oversized rule book, frankly. This is a huge problem with the components for this game, though. So in this, there's a solo mode, but we're not talking about that. Here, there's the nation component thing. And in here, they tell you the nation's starting abilities, the advanced abilities, and they also tell you what every card does for your nation. This is in one book. So there's red, then yellow, then blue, then green, and then it talks about the solo mode. The problem is, do you want to hand this around the whole game? I don't, but you have to. Why didn't they make player aids for each of the players that had that information on them? This is also not an easy thing to hand around. It's this giant rule book that's the same as the box. This is a terrible thing. Now, again, I'm being harsher on this than maybe I would be normally because, again, everything else in the game is fantastic. I like the dice. I like that the different symbols don't really mean anything except they remind you this is cavalry and so on. But that has been my huge problem every single time because everyone's like, I don't know what my special abilities do. I don't know what this card does, and I have to pass this book around, and that's a real pain. And it seems like a huge oversight to not have that in the game. And I'm also not loving the packing this game up. It's such a pain with all the different things in it. I'm going to figure out a good way to pack it up. And you could complain that the board itself is not tremendously exciting. But all that being said, other than the player aids, I think the components for this game are top-notch. We were pretty excited when this game first showed up, and so I made a critical error when I first played this because I broke one of my rules, and that rule is if a game comes with a 5th player expansion separately, never play with that 5th player. But we did because 5 people want to play. And guess what? This game is terrible with 5. I mean, I would give this a 2 out of 10 with 5. It's so slow. One player can have an advantage that's insurmountable. It's just rotten. Okay, so keep that in mind. Also, the learning curve is a little higher because the game is just not intuitive in many ways. So that's another way to keep in mind. The fewer players, the better the game is. It's a really good 2-player game. It's a pretty solid 3-player game. It's a decent 4-player game. 5, it's terrifying. So there's also a bunch of other expansions, and I can't really speak to them. The basic conceit of the game is the card system. Take a card, move some pieces, put them out there. I like that system a lot. You know, there's 2 card systems. There's the one card system where you're figuring out what units, where to move them, control the board. And then the other card system is those support cards, which you are playing to boost up your guys. They're really interesting. Like this card says, this works if your opponent has artillery. This card works if you have cavalry. I'm like, well, there's an artillery. I have cavalry. If I attack them, I can play both of these cards. But then there's this, it's a very much of a, since you're playing these cards back and forth, you know, or actually the the defender has to play all their cards first. So you sit there and go, how many cards am I going to play? What are they going to do back to me? And I like that aspect of the game. It's very much kind of, like I said, like a chess thing, like I'm thinking. And even when you lose, this game has a nice catch-up mechanism in the fact that the loser gets more cards for the next round, while the winner gets points, of course. The nation abilities aren't dramatically effective, and that's one thing I had to come to grips with when I got my initial cards. I'm like, ooh, which of these is amazing? Well, none of them is amazing. They're decent. It's just that when you put a bunch of decent abilities together as the game goes by, I have 2 nation cards in front of me. I'll play 3 tactic cards from my hand. I'll use my Titan special ability because they're in the battle. All that combined makes battles very interesting, this back and forth. There's still luck involved. You're still rolling the dice. Although, again, there are cards and abilities and things that can let you re-roll dice, which is sometimes pretty critical. But that luck, while it's there, and it definitely is a part of the game, when it comes back with this strategic card picking, makes for a very interesting game. Now, this game is not amazing. I already mentioned one of the reasons why. The gameplay gets better with fewer players. There is some luck with the dice, but more importantly, I think there's some luck with the the secret objective cards. At the beginning, you draft them and you try to give your opponent one that they'll never do, if at all possible. As the game goes by, you can draft more. So at the beginning, you draft. As the game goes by, you can draw some. Sometimes you draw a card and you're like, oh, I can do this right now. And that luck, I felt, was a little swingy sometimes because, hey, if I get 3 points in this game is a lot. And I draw one and I go, well, there's nothing I can really do with this one. This is not going to happen. It says control the center region. I'm up here fighting on the side of the board. The components are really cool, except for that glaring lack of player aid. I'm going to have to go find some and print them out because that's, again, I just find that to be kind of insane that that's not included. There's so many expansions, so many things in this game. But I really like the battle system. I like the combat system. And when I played it as a 2-player, I was like, wow, it was a nice back and forth thing. It still didn't necessarily blow me away. And honestly, because this came out at the same time as, let's say, Ankh, they came out very close to each other. There's going to be a lot of comparisons, and Ankh is clearly the superior game. But there are some things about this one that I like better. I do like rolling dice. At the end of the day, rolling dice is fun. I like the way the support system works. It says if I have this and you have that, this card works. And I can make that happen. I like the dice and the different, the infantry clearly are not as good as the Titan. And just having that Titan, not overpowered, they can be knocked over. That feels cool and it feels neat. So if you're looking for a game, especially for 2 to 3 players, a tactical, lighter war game, a 2-player game of this is an hour, maybe 90 minutes at most. 30 players, 90 minutes. 4 players, 2 hours. 5 players, don't do it. But again, it doesn't come in a base game. And then there's all this other extra stuff too. But I'll tell you what, all that other extra stuff, I haven't thrown in a game. And the main reason why is because I have to look at more player aids and more stuff. So if they come out with some nice player aids, then I think that I could try some of that other stuff out. As it is, though, I think Titans is a solid game. It's worth checking out. It's a big, giant box. I mean, the box itself is a Titanic box, and the miniatures are big, and that's good because it gives you that kind of look at it. And it has a historical feel to it, despite the fact that there's giant Titans. But it's interesting, and it doesn't feel like a lot of other games that are out there. It's going to be a little slow for some. Walking across the board can take an entire round. But the combat itself, I think, makes up for that. So certainly something to check out. That's Titans. I'm Tom Vasel. We'll see you next time. Dice Tower Judgment approved.